So, hello and welcome everybody. It is an enormous pleasure to kick off today's PRCA Africa webinar. My name is Richard Bangall. I am the co-managing partner of CARMA International. CARMA is a global media intelligence and comms evaluation business. We've got offices right across the world, including in Africa, Europe and America and the Middle East and Asia Pacific. I've been doing measurement and evaluation for nearly 30 years now, would you believe? Part of that career has been spent working at Amec. I'm going to talk today about some of the work that Amec does, as well as some of the work that CARMA does. Amec is the global trade association that exists to help anybody interested in how to measure the effectiveness of communications in a meaningful way to do it more successfully. I chaired Amec for the last 6 years, and I led many of the initiatives that Amec is known for, and I'm going to talk a bit about them and how we can apply it. It's a pleasure for me to have the opportunity to speak. I do speak all around the world and always take the opportunity to do so because there is an urgent need for the PR and comms industry to measure in a better way than it currently is doing. I'm going to drill in today a little bit into that, what the challenges are, and why we need to do better, but importantly, how we can do better, what sort of things it is that you can take away from today and start applying immediately back in your office. Obviously, it's a PRCA Africa event, and I wanted to begin today by just quietly remembering Francis Ingham. Francis Ingham sadly passed away less than a week ago. He was a young man, 47 years old, with 4 children. He had a short and sudden illness and very sadly died last Thursday. Francis was the Director General of the PRCA and also the Chief Executive of ECO, the umbrella body. And Francis was absolutely adamant about the importance of meaningful, proper measurement. And I thought it would be appropriate as we reflect on his passing to think about words that he said. And I don't normally do this, but I took a quote and I've put it there on the slide, and I will read it out, but don't worry, the presentation won't be me reading bullet points as we go through. But Francis, I can still hear him say it again and again. He used to say, we have a talent problem, as in the PR and comms industry has a talent problem. It's the biggest problem that faces our industry. The reason is that we fail to recruit and retain the very best talent. It's perfectly simple. We don't pay enough. We don't pay enough because we don't charge enough. We don't charge enough because we don't measure the effectiveness of our work well enough. So we must invest in better measurement. That way we can fix our biggest problem. Francis knew how important it was for PR and comms to measure the value of its work in a meaningful way. May you rest in peace, Francis. You know, in 2008, I thought that the world had taken a turn for the worse with the global financial crisis. But, you know, since then, it's just been one thing after another, hasn't it? And I'm sure like me, you guys probably all feel pretty battered by everything that's going on at the moment. We've had the financial crisis, which is still flushing through with, you know, what's happened at Credit Suisse over the weekend and Silicon Valley Bank. We've had COVID that we've all had to endure. Coming out of that, we've got supply chain issues, we've got inflation, we've got cost of living, and of course we now have global uncertainty in terms of a war between pretty much superpowers, but certainly Russia and Ukraine, potentially China getting involved with Russia and the West getting involved with Ukraine. These are the most uncertain times that I've ever lived through, and I'm sure I speak for all of us. So first of all, I you know, at a human level, I'd say to everybody on this call, I hope that you guys are all okay. My thoughts are with everyone as we all navigate these times. But if we think about this professionally, all of this uncertainty in the global economy is creating a perfect storm that is facing the PR and comms industry. And that is that we are not taking measurement Seriously, we are paying lip service to it. We're counting stuff that's easy to count, but we're not measuring in a meaningful way. Why does this matter? Well, right now, across the globe, this is happening. CFOs everywhere are reviewing budgets, reviewing line items, reviewing costs, and they're saying, what do we want to spend our money on? What is it that is providing value to my organization? What is it that is just activity and cost without benefit? And if our PR and comms is seen as cost without benefit, we face a huge challenge, and we are likely to be cut. We need to have the confidence and the ability to be able to defend and enhance our budgets, defense and enhance our relationships with our clients, and prove our value. And the problem is, if we think about measurement, we think about measurement in terms of three different broad buckets. And I just want to make sure we're all aligned on what those three things are. We talk about outputs, outtakes, and outcomes. And I'm going to briefly explain to you what each is. Outputs is all of the stuff that we do and that we generate. It's all of the content. In the old days, it used to be the paper-based clips. Today, of course, it's digital. It might be social media. It might be broadcast. It's all of the stuff that we generate as a result of the activity that we do. Outtakes, the lady in the middle, is what people now think, having seen or heard or watched the stuff that we've done, the outputs. So how have we driven awareness or reputation, propensity to buy, those type of things? Anything to do with thinking is what we call outtakes. And then on the right of this slide is outcomes. What does that mean? Well, that's what have we now done? Now that we've thought about it, what have we now done? Have we done an action that benefits our organization? It might be, have we bought a product? It might be, have we attended an event? And it will depend, that action, that outcome will depend on whatever it is that your organizational objectives are, whether if you're a client, if you're in-house, what are your organizational objectives? And if you're a PR agency, what are the organizational objectives of your client? Now, the biggest issue that we face as PR and comms pros is our measurement is stuck over here. I'm sure this type of dashboard is familiar to you all. There's hundreds of companies now offering these real-time dashboards that count stuff. They talk about AI, automation, counts and amounts, real-time. You can click on the chart and drill into the data. The price points being commoditized, and it looks like it's measurement and it looks like it matters. But the problem is it's measuring the stuff. What organizations care about, where the value is, isn't in the activity, the stuff here on the left, it's in what people think and what people do, the stuff in the middle and the stuff on the right. This is where client organizations are focused and where they care. So what we call the outtakes and the outcomes, driving propensity to buy, reputation, etc., driving sales. That is what our clients want us to do. And our challenge then is that we need to evolve our thinking from just counting stuff over on the left here to looking at what people think and what people do in the middle and on the right. And it matters more now than ever because so many of the counts and amounts, these big numbers, just are losing their meaning. And here I've drilled into CARMA's database of global media content, and I've pulled out 250,000 articles, some enormous number of impressions. That line in the middle, I can't even do justice to whatever number that is, 427 billion or whatever it is, and then some massive advertising value equivalent. These numbers have no relevance or meaning or credibility to a C-suite. And by the way, this content from the CARMA database is just for one part of Microsoft in just one quarter. And you're already getting these absolutely crazy numbers. And why is this happening? Well, it's because content's globalizing. It's because everything's gone digital. With ChatGPT, by the way, we're now going to see even more content coming out because bots are going to create it. Bots are going to write content. There's going to be a content avalanche. The pandemic drove changes. It accelerated the amount of time that we spend online. Um, Over 8 hours a day is now spent on average online, and it drove globalization of content too. So the BBC, British Broadcasting Corporation, obviously known as a British institution, if you actually look at it and look in, here I am in the CARMA database again, you can see that actually it has far higher readership in the US than it does in the UK. So we can't just assume that because a media is in a particular region, we're actually reaching the audience that matters for us. Now, so these counts and amounts are losing their relevance, but we need to align better with our clients. So the PRCA, as I mentioned, its umbrella body is called ECO, and the latest ECO report, when you drill into that, you can see that what clients actually want us to report on, the metrics clients want us to do, the objectives that clients want us to fulfill. Number one is support their corporate reputation. Number two is increase their sales. And number three is to help them build their brand purpose. When we look at the metrics that we as PR professionals are actually giving them to try to talk to this, you can see that none of the top 5 metrics talk to any of those objectives. We've got things like AVEs, media clippings, sentiment metrics, media summaries. This does not talk to whether we're driving sales, whether we're helping build brand purpose or corporate reputation. We've got to move from the left of that slide. We've got to start moving across to the middle and the right. We need to pull this together to tell a meaningful measurement story. So my message today is there's no time now for excuses. We are in uncertain times. CFOs everywhere are wanting to cut budgets. Activity does not equal value. We have to demonstrate our value in a meaningful way if we want to continue to succeed. I've heard every excuse under the sun from PR and comms pros about why they don't want to evolve their measurement program, from they don't have the budget, they don't have the time, there's no demand, et cetera, et cetera. These are all excuses, guys. It's time to lean in and really embrace not just counting stuff, but measuring in a meaningful way to show that you are creating and driving value for your organization. And before I move on to how we're going to do that, just a couple of thoughts on, more on why these problems are. One of them was beautifully described to me by the head of UK Government Communications Service, a chap called Alex Aitken. And Alex said, the number one problem that PR and comms pros have is they just do SOS. I said, what do you mean, Alex, by SOS? And he said, well, they just send out stuff. They just send out stuff because they get too busy. They don't take the time to be strategic. There's too much stuff going on. And because there's too much stuff going on, we just do stuff. He says, no, we need to stop and we need to plan. A proper measurement program begins at the planning stage. So we have planning, research and evaluation, PR and E, they should all go hand in hand. Now, look, the good news is that help is at hand. I mentioned that I was the chair of Amec for 6 years. I'm still a board director and I led many of its initiatives. Amec's driving purpose is to educate the market with free best practice guidance to help you shape how to navigate these choppy seas. I use this photo. It's a photo of the south coast of England. It's a beautiful harbour down there because twice a day the tide comes into this harbour. At the moment, you can see in this photo, it's low tide. The tide comes in twice a day, and all of those boats, all of those ships that you can see lift. And it reminds me of the expression that a rising tide lifts all ships. And that was the ethos behind Amec's actual formation. My secret is that even though I was the chairman for the last 6 years, 27 years ago when Amec was formed, I didn't want us to become a member of it because I thought, why should I help our competitors? And my business partner said to me, because a rising tide lifts all ships. And to this day, I'm happy to say that he was right and I was wrong. It matters so much. So one of the things you may know Amec for is the Barcelona Principles. The Barcelona Principles were created in 2010. They're updated every 5 years. I'm not going to read them out. And I should say that the slides will be shared with you. And every time you see a little cross down here in the bottom left, and a word down here. There'll be a link to take you to further information and guidance on how to do things. But they were created in 2010. They've been updated every 5 years since. And they give you a sort of helicopter view, a 30,000-foot view of what measurement should and shouldn't include. They were created in 2010 with not just Amec, but multiple global trade associations, PRCA, ECO, the Global Alliance, the America's IPR, multiple different trade associations all came together to say we must have some common steps of what good looks like. And so that's how the Barcelona principles came about. They're perhaps most well known for principle number 5, which is that, as you can see here on the left, AVEs are not the value of communications. What is an AVE? It's advertising value equivalent. We saw that on the Microsoft slide. AVEs are not the value of comms. Why not? Well, many reasons. Rather than going into them today, I wrote a white paper on it. It's one of Amec's best traffic pieces of content. And it's a third-party endorsement for anybody who's struggling with this metric. It's been decried as invalid now for 12 years. Here is a list of 22 reasons why it's an invalid metric. So if you're under pressure from your boss, from your client to provide AVEs, we appreciate it's not easy just to move away from them to better measurement, but you can begin that process, and you can begin that process by explaining to them why they're not a valid metric. And there you'll find those reasons. Again, it's linked at the bottom left of this slide. I talked about planning being an integral part of measurement. And so in my last year of chairmanship, I drove the Amec guide to PR planning. How do you do a meaningful comms plan that links through to your measurement? So there's an absolutely fabulous resource on Amec's website, linked at the bottom. I'm not going to go into detail here for sake of time, but go and take a read of it. It's got a what we call a scribbler to help you actually work out all of the objectives, all of the things that you want to do, and to come up with a meaningful measurement plan. Now, the biggest criticism that the Barcelona principles got was that, look, they're a 30,000-foot view, they're a helicopter view of what we should do, but they don't tell us how to measure in a meaningful way themselves. So how do we do that? So I led something called the Integrated Evaluation Framework development. Now, this is something that has absolutely taken off. What it was a method to help PR and comms pros of any size, whether you're the largest global bank or the smallest regional charity, whether you're a huge, massive PR agency like Edelman, or whether you're the smallest independent consultant. How can you think about measurement in a meaningful way in a world where you've got to measure that isn't just outputs, but has to include the outtakes, what people think, and the outcomes? It needs to have a decent plan as well. But also that the world has changed, hasn't it, in media and comms? No longer is it just media relations. We have to operate across paid, earned, shared, and owned. So we need to understand about buying ads. We need to be able to do earned, we need to be able to do shared, we need to be able to do owned as well. So we need to measure across those 4 dimensions, but also across the 3 dimensions of the outputs, the stuff, but linking it through to the outtakes and the outcomes, and putting it all together to tell a meaningful measurement story. So I led a group that worked with academics, with PR agencies, with trade associations to get a common view of what good looks like. It's been translated into more than 22 languages. It's in use by over 2,000 organizations across the world, from the world's really, most important organizations like the United Nations. Their measurement approach is based on this. It's one of the things that makes me most proud in my career, is the success of this. And I want you guys to know about it, and I want you guys to use it. So there's the URL. It has a microsite full of useful information and resource. I'm just going to give you a top line about it. It's a 7-stage process. It's color coded. It's interactive so that you can click on our website, on Amec's website, and interact into all of these different areas. And if you begin anywhere in a wheel, you begin at 12 o'clock here. So that's a red section between organizational objectives and communications objectives here. The first thing we have to understand is what is the organization that we represent trying to achieve? What is that organization's purpose? What are its objectives? Once we understand them, we need to align our PR and comms objectives against them. Make sure that we're not just doing stuff for no reason that links to what our organization actually is trying to do. So let's get that stuff aligned. That's the first step. Then we move into the orange part of the wheel between sort of 3 o'clock and 5 o'clock. And you can see here, this is still labeled under preparation, but this is all about understanding what do we have, what resources do we have, what other inputs, what tactical ammunition do I have, who's my target audience, what do I know about them, getting all those baselines together so that we can then plan, set targets that are smart, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time-bound. Put it all together and to create our strategy and then our tactics. Now you can see that outer gray bar. It's no accident that nearly, not far off half of this wheel is all in the preparation. So one big tip today, focus on putting the time in to prepare and to think through all of the stuff that you're tasked with doing so that you can talk about it in a meaningful way. Then it's time at 6 o'clock at the bottom in the green section to implement and to come up with your creative ideas and to do your strategy, your tactics, and to implement and to make sure that that's linking against all this stuff that we've done as part of our preparation. And then it's time to measure. And you can see in the measurement section from sort of 7 till sort of 10 o'clock, in the blue section, we've got the outputs, the outtakes, and the outcomes. So we're saying don't just measure the stuff, but let's measure what people think and what people have done as a result of the stuff that we've done as well. Then let's link it all together, and then we'll be able to understand the organizational and the stakeholder effect that we've had. And we should do this for each and every client that we work on, whether we're in-house or whether we're at an agency. And I wanted to acknowledge what a lot of people say is like, well, look, my PR and comms work isn't about driving sales. It's about reputation. It's about awareness. It's about informing. It's about driving propensity to recommend, net promoter score, that type of stuff. So I've put here the one of the versions of the marketing funnel, of which there are many, and we don't need to bog ourselves down in this. They all follow this basic step-by-step process where you need to bring your prospects or your client base or your stakeholders in at this top level, this awareness, then interest, then decision, and then action. Now, some of you, it may be that your work is focused around just these top two areas, and that's okay. The framework is not prescriptive. You don't have to fill in every part. What you have to do is use the appropriate parts for the appropriate part of the work that you do. Now, how does CARMA think about this when we work with our clients? So we work with clients of all shapes and sizes, from the smallest regional companies to the world's largest on massive global programs like Honda and HSBC, for example. They're all partner clients with us. We simplify it even further. We take the framework and we simplify it to help these clients really make it tangible and make it real for them. So we talk about see, think, and do. Outputs, outtakes, outcomes. See, think, and do. And we split the metrics like that. You can see here as well that we don't have a section called outtakes, because for this client, I've blanked who it is, but for this client, we've merged outtakes, what people think, with outcomes, and it's sitting over here. We just group them together under the outcome. And I think that's a really important point to make. The framework is not prescriptive. I repeat it. It's a process that you can tailor and shape as you work through it. Now, CARMA would love to work with you to help you to do that, but it's designed to help, for you guys to do it yourself as well. And on the subject of Amec's resources, just one final one I wanted to flag to you, because a lot of people say, well, that's all very well, but what about the metrics? I need to know what metrics. We have this thing, it's very difficult to read in the slide. It's not designed to be read in the slide, but it's called the taxonomy. And it's a really brilliant piece of work. And it suggests to you, under all of these different parts of the framework, what are the different metrics that we might want to be considering. So when you go to Amec's website, do make sure you go and take a look at the taxonomy and inform yourself about that. You'll find it. Again, surprise, surprise, as I said before, linked down at the bottom left. Okay, a lot of people ask us for practical, tangible examples of this type of stuff. So I've put here 2 examples for you of how CARMA has worked using this approach to tell meaningful measurement stories. And I've taken 2 very well-known issues over the last few years. The first one, I'm going to begin on the right, is a UK story. It did go global. You may or may not have heard of it. But if you can cast your mind back to those dark days at the beginning of the pandemic, when everyone was frightened, no one quite knew what was happening, and everyone felt helpless, and different countries, different parts of the world at different times were going into lockdown, etc. In Britain, there was a war veteran who was 99, about to be 100 years old. And he said, I'm not going to just sit at home and be helpless. He said, I'm going to raise money for the nurses and the doctors. And I'm going to walk 100 times around my house. And he had a Zimmer frame. He was an elderly gentleman, as I say, 99 years old. And I'm going to, my ambition, my objective is to raise £1,000. So he started walking around the house, and with no marketing, no strategy, no nothing, then the media got hold of this story, and it went viral, and it went huge. The story blew up. It went around the world. Some of you may well be aware of it in Africa. I know the content literally went right around the world, including in Africa. And Captain Tom, in 30 days, raised £32 million. So forget the 1,000 that he set out to achieve. He raised £32 million. So we wanted to do a report to look at, well, how did that happen? But not let's just count the counts and amounts. Let's not just count how many tweets there were and how many impressions and what the AVE was. No, let's look at the meaningful metrics, and let's pull out the key PR insights that come from behind that. So we wrote this report in collaboration with 6 leading PR specialists as well, who each chose an insight. It's a fascinating report of the real story that was going on, of why a story goes viral. So if you're interested in that, you'll be able to download it from that link on the right. The other story I think affects us all. It was about the rollout of the vaccine. And I remember the day that it was announced that the first vaccine actually had some efficacy and did work. And I remember the huge sense of relief that came over me when that happened. And the AstraZeneca vaccine was the first one that went live just before the Pfizer one. And the rollout began, I think, in December. I think it was a British lady got injected. I remember that being on the news. And we thought, look, this is an interesting thing to track across different countries, the different vaccine manufacturers, different vaccine products, and to look at the rollout across these 10 different companies, these 6 different vaccine manufacturers, and see how it worked across the world and what part communications played in trust. So what people, the reputation and the trust of people being prepared to come forward for a vaccine, and then the actually having it as well. And what we were able to see in this report was that it differed massively in different markets, depending on how clearly and credibly and consistently different messages about the vaccine were communicated. In the UK, it was, there was a lot of, it was still when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, there was a lot of sort of British flag waving, oh, we're the first of the vaccine. And people just came forward, they put their trust into the government, and they came forward and happily got inoculated. In markets like France and Germany, there was President Macron and Mrs. Merkel of Germany. They were communicating in a much more confused manner, because there was concerns that the vaccine might not be safe. First, they said it wasn't safe for the elderly. Then they said it wasn't safe for the young. Sorry, just get my slide back. And the result of that was that people became fearful, and we tracked what people thought in these different countries. So we could see in France and Germany, people were searching for, if I take the vaccine, will I die? Whereas in the UK, they weren't searching for that at all. And then people weren't coming forward. When that first vaccine was available, the AstraZeneca one, in France and Germany and other markets around the world, they were not coming forward for it at the same rate that the UK were. It's absolutely fascinating to do with trust, credibility, reputation, consistency of message of both leader, of manufacturer, of influencers in a medical setting as well. And we did a webinar with the UK government team that were behind the COVID vaccine communications program, but also experts from Edelman and Porter Novelli and the PRCA and Astute PR as well. It's a brilliant webinar. It's got some fascinating insights, and on that you'll be able to find how to download that report as well. Let's go and take a look, because we're measuring the content, the outputs, the outtakes, the outcomes. We're pulling it all together, telling a story and comparing market with market. So 2 great case studies for you to take a look at there. Now I need to hurry up. So finishing off, 3 tips for success for you. I think at the moment there's a huge amount of noise around ChatGPT. There's been a lot of noise around technology and AI for a while now, but it's only ramping up. So my first tip is, please, guys, do not just rely on a vendor doing all this for you, using automation and pretty looking dashboards and just counting stuff. If you do that, remember, you're going to be that guy, you're going to be that person on the left of the slide, just counting stuff. You're just demonstrating to your CFO that you're busy, but you're not demonstrating that you're creating any value. We've got to lean in. We've got to take those metrics and we've got to build on them to show how it made people think and how it made people do stuff. So linking that together, pulling it together, tell a meaningful measurement story. And that, I've got bad news for you, takes you. It takes your time, you leaning in, your thought process, your ability to give it relevance, and the critical thinking to align it to your organization. So please lean in, pay attention, put the work in. Don't forget that impressions, engagement, as in likes, shares, retweets, that type of stuff, that does not equal knowledge and awareness. They're different things. Something like 70% of people will retweet a tweet without having read the tweet. Just because I've done something that flags itself as an engagement metric doesn't mean that I've engaged with it. Okay, so don't rely on impressions. Remember, we looked at the Microsoft impressions, those huge numbers. Impressions do not mean that the people you're trying to reach have any awareness or any knowledge of what it is that you're talking about. How do we understand what the people we're trying to reach actually think and feel and do? We ask them. We need to blend some market research against our media content analysis. And so my last point is, just a reminder, please, guys, take the time, lean in, and make sure that you are telling that meaningful measurement story. Make sure that you are showing yourselves to be a value creator in this uncertain world where every budget is under intense pressure. We know, us on this call, we know the value of PR and comms. We know the value that we create for our organizations. Let's make sure that we can describe it and prove it and fight for it to our clients, to our stakeholders within our business, depending whether you're in-house or agency, in a meaningful way. That will take time. You can't outsource the thinking. So thanks for listening to me. My challenge to you all is be the change. We're in uncertain times. We need to all step up. No more excuses. Everyone step up. Let's see you guys lead the global market from the Africa region. CARMA stands ready to work with you and help you. We love working with our clients, helping them. And you can see in the latest Amec Awards, some of the categories that we've been acknowledged with gold awards for helping people improving their measurement program, best multi-market measurement, most effective planning, research and evaluation, single event campaign, step change award in how to measure. So if you're looking to go on a measurement journey and measure in a meaningful way, I know Philippe and the team from CARMA Africa are on this call and would be pleased to help. And you'll find me online. I'm always very happy to take questions and help people if they've got challenges. Just reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn or via my email, richard.bagnall@carma.com. I hope that's made sense. It's been a real pleasure for me to have the opportunity to speak to you all. And with that, I shall hand back to the PRCA for the next stage of this webinar. Enjoy the rest of it, and I'll try and hang around. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Richard. That was lovely. And I actually wrote that down. Tell a meaningful measurement story. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Nicola Nell from Atmosphere Communications in Cape Town. We've got offices in Johannesburg as well. And really appreciative to be on this PRCA call, and particularly to talk about measurement and measurement in a crisis. But I'd love to introduce my fellow panelists so that you can get a little bit of insight. We've got good representation as far afield as Australia, Ivory Coast, and then, of course, in Belgium. So, Richard, I'm going to hand over to you to quickly give us a brief overview of yourself, your background, and the type of work you do, particularly in crisis communications and measurement. Philippe, over to you.
Should I start again? Okay.
Start again.
Hi, everyone. I checked who was, I got the list of the countries represented on the call, which is great because it does represent the diversity of the continent. You could say marhaba and bon arrivé, because I see that people are here from all over the continent, which is great. So my name is Philippe Bormans. I know a couple of people who are participating to this webinar. Based in Portugal, in fact, originally from Belgium. I lived in and worked in Africa. I'm specialized in risk communication and community engagement, and then in that context, even more in epidemics and pandemics. So I usually work for UN agencies and governments across the globe. For the moment, I'm covering the European region.
Thank you, Philippe. And over to you, Kylie.
Hello from Melbourne, Australia, everybody. My name is Carly. I work with CARMA. I work with Richard at CARMA. I am the head of Insights. So my remit is mostly a focus on the Asia Pacific, but I do look after our clients more globally than that as well. Most of my experience, the last 20 years, has been specifically in the measurement and evaluation of communications. I come to it with quite a strength in the private sector. So my discussion points today are really about corporate affairs and corporate reputation. I've loved every moment of all of those 20 years in this industry, and really love solving the puzzles that communications provides, and really that search for proving impact and effectiveness.
Excellent. So we've got a public sector expert, a private company expert, and then my co-South African, Lerato, who's not in South Africa, who's in the Ivory Coast. Lerato, would you like to introduce yourself to the team?
Hi, Nicola. Hi, everyone. My name is Lerato Mpolo, Managing Director at Opinion in Public, BCW. It's an agency that is based in Cote d'Ivoire, Abidjan. And we help clients to communicate effectively, to their existing stakeholders and prospective ones in the Francophone Africa region. And we typically work across public affairs, as well as corporate communications, which is actually quite a strength of mine, or my background, having worked across the financial sector, technology, as well as professional services over the years. So yes, I'm happy to be here, and hopefully we can delve into the issues that clients face, or we face with clients, around measuring, our effectiveness in campaigns, as well as the crisis part of what we do.
Excellent, thank you. And just quickly, the format, we have about a half an hour. It will be a debate, so we'll have differing viewpoints, which is good. And then sort of on the quarter of the hour, we'll take questions. And in the meanwhile, if you could type your questions in the chat column, we'll get to them afterwards, or maybe jot them down, because we'd love for the session to be interactive and not us just chatting all the time. So our topic is very much around measurement and monitoring in times of a crisis. So I'm going to throw the question to Carly first, and particularly, why is it so important to measure the impact of communications while there's a crisis happening? Carly, can you kick off for us?
Thank you, everyone. Unfortunately, I am living this and breathing this at the moment. CARMA, we're working with a client that is facing a media crisis at the moment through a cyber incident. So it's very fresh content today for those that have joined us. Measurement, monitoring, and analysis is pivotal in a crisis. And I wanted to talk about the two most important moments in measurement and crises. The first 24 hours, 48 hours are incredibly important, and measurement plays a very big role in that. When you first get breaking news and things are a little chaotic because it's come as a surprise and things are a little bit chaotic, measurement allows you to redirect your energy and your focus with confidence. I like to call it that you can pick your battles. You know what phone calls to make, you know what resources to pull in. The data can guide you to really tell you what don't I need to worry about today and what should I focus on. So in that first 48 hours, let the data guide you on what's important and where you need to direct your energy. The second point where analysis takes on a very, very meaningful role for most organizations is at the very end of a crisis. So we're talking about that time of reflection where we're usually, we have gone well beyond quantitative metrics. We're not looking at the statistics or in terms of volume or messaging. We're really looking at integrated research. We're using things like reputation surveys to find out the ultimate impact on that negative issue on the client's reputation. So those two moments for me are incredibly important. They require different research methods. So at that first 24-hour peak, you need quantitative metrics. You look at things like velocity per hour, volume, new voices, new angles. You're looking at a dynamic issue. At the end of that period, you're actually doing very much deeper work, much more qualitative work to understand the ultimate impact.
Excellent. I love that. Philippe, you bring a different perspective, mainly on, we chatted yesterday about either where there's natural disasters or pandemics or endemics. How have you used measurements in times of these when there's a pressure on for communication? How have you used, how have you approached it?
I think measurement communication in the areas I work, it's we have a MEL abbreviation, measurement, evaluation, and learning. So that learning part is really crucial in there, because we learn from emergencies. So I mainly work on health emergencies, ranging from earthquakes like the terrible one in Turkey and Syria, and then pandemics and epidemics. So how do we use that? It is, I would argue, a little bit more complex. I come from the private sector, so I think I can compare. Where we speak about crises and emergencies, already there's a bit of a difference, because normally in a crisis, if you look at it from a private sector point of view, you are an active player, or if not, the origin of the crisis, of what is happening. When you work for UN agencies or government organizations, going on the ground to save lives, it's different. You are not an active part. I mean, you're not the origin of the crisis or the emergency. And so the measurement methodology that we use is a little bit different, and I would argue a little bit more complex. Complex in the way that what is typical in an emergency is that we work a lot with uncertainties. What Kali said, those first 24 hours are of course crucial. That is getting people on the ground, boots on the ground, as we say, and saving lives, the ones that you can save immediately. But then when we go further, and many of these emergencies have a long time, weeks, months, and if not years, what you see is that to measure, evaluate your effectiveness of your risk communication or your emergency risk communication becomes complex in the way that you, most of the time, you're not the only player. And what our interest is there is a bigger focus on the end audience. So I'm not going to say, well, in risk communication and community engagement, we actually don't really care what the media says. That is for our corporate comms people. They are responsible for the reputation of the organization we're working for. In RCCE, risk comms, we're responsible to save lives. So there's a different focus. And so what we really want to know is the messages that we create, are they resonating with different audiences? And that is the end audience. Those are the people in need. So we do a lot of message testing. We adapt them, of course, to cultural situations, to all these things that can influence people on the ground that we're trying to help. And so, again, to keep it short, I would say measurement, evaluation, and learning. Learning is a very important thing because we want to learn from every crisis so that we can save more lives for the next one. And complex because of the time frame and the different players and the focus on the end audience, not so much on the channels that send or let's say distribute our messages.
Thanks, Philippe. I think that's very valuable. It gives us a different perspective. I think quite often when we're involved with the private sector, it's all about the reputation of the individual or the product or the CEO, but it's quite different in the public environment. Lerato, what is your perception in Africa, and particularly managing and measuring crises and the communication side? Can you give us a little bit of insight in, particularly in your country where you're operating, Ivory Coast, how would that be different to maybe to the rest? You're on mute.
Well, I suppose in this region, it's very important when such an event occurs, you really do understand in which, well, let me rather say measurement or an evaluation will actually help you understand to which extent, the problem that you have is, and in which channels that you're able to tackle this problem or issue, as well as it'll actually also be able to sort of give you some insights as to what's happening on the ground, actually, and give you some insights on maybe the nuances on the issue, and also will be able to assist you in terms of how do you make decisions moving forward, because it's not unlike in Francophone Africa, it's not as the same as in South Africa, where most of or in the developed markets, where a lot of the things now are mostly based on a digital space, and you just are able to log on to some sort of a software and you're able to look through what's happening. But it's more all-encompassing, it's integrated. You need to be able to actually understand what's happening on the ground, and especially as, and above, and, be able to tackle that the problem right through. So, I mean, I think that pretty much sums up as to how on this part of the continent, a crisis or a measurement would be able to, assist in a crisis. Yeah.
So you mentioned information and getting it from the ground. Where do you get your information? Do you use, I don't know if you use CARMA, and maybe some media analysis tools, but where do you get the information in order to help you with your quick decision making?
Well, as you know, in addition to those tools, it would be other than evaluating or having discussions with media one-on-one, it's also being able to have the resources to interview relevant stakeholders one-on-one as well. That's actually quite an important thing, especially those who are very close to, or sources that are very close to the information that you're targeting. So, I mean, that's pretty much it, to be quite honest, and it's a big deal.
So we heard Richard say about, we need the human insight. It's not only about the dashboards and the tools. And Philippe, we had a chat yesterday about that tools are valuable, but human insights are more valuable. Can you give us whether it's a practical example so that it's not only a tool-based when you measure crisis communications? Where do you think, and we chatted about AI, and Richard also mentioned, what is your view about all the tools that's available, and how can it help us as practitioners in the middle of a crisis?
I think you actually really need to know what you're expecting from a or several tools. Most of the time will be several, I think. So what do you actually expect? You want to do media monitoring, then there's a whole bunch of tools available on the market. Do you want to do predictive analytics, which is already a bit more complicated, or a lot more complicated, and which will probably involve AI, and there are a bit less tools available. They are available. So it is really, what are you actually wanting to do? What do you want to measure? And then really look at, okay, which tools come into play for that specific objective. I don't think there's one single tool that can do everything. That's an illusion. But so first decide what you actually need from a tool. And then on the human side of things, on a very practical basis, I saw in the list some people from Benin where on the webinar, and they'll recognize this. I worked in Benin and in Western Africa, specifically around prevention of malaria epidemics. And it's very simple, especially in Benin and surrounding countries. If as a health risk communicator, you are not completely aligned with the voodoo priest or the traditional medicine man, then your messages are simply not getting across. And that is one thing. But what is even more important, I need those influencers to get the pulse if my messages are arriving, if they are translated, if they are effective, if people are acting on the messages that I'm distributing so that they can protect themselves. And that feedback is crucial. And so I'm getting that from the people we work with on the ground. There is not one single tool who can tell me that. I am not working in a huge metropolis where everything is connected. I am working in the field where radio most of the time is the most important communications system available. And of course, people have mobile phones, but we do work on the ground with communities. There's a lot of community engagement there. It's visiting villages and sitting around the campfire and talking about what we actually do and if they understood the messages and if they are changing behavior or not, etc. So and yes, we use monitoring tools, and yes, we use predictive analytics tools, definitely. So it's the whole setup, but human and machine together, and AI may be in the middle, can make a difference. But it comes down to what, I'm completely aligned with what Richard said. What do you want to do? What is your objective? What type of crisis are you in? And what are your feedback needs? So that informs your next step or your current messaging or your current activities. So both are very, very important. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what you're saying, Philippe, there's not one answer that's a fit all for everything. And I think Colin Hava just asked in the chat column, Kylie, and it's particularly for you. He says, so, we can't rely on, for example, media analysis tools only. And if you want to do a survey about a particular perception, is how big should that be, and what should you ask, and who should you ask? And I know that's a very broad question, but maybe you can relate it to a practical example for us.
Sure. Reputation analysis is a field beyond media analysis. So media analysis looks at all types of media. And then we have this discipline of reputation analysis. And there are a number of very, very established companies that do this. CARMA has methodologies that are off the shelf that we can provide. And as an overview, we look at media coverage, we look at what people are saying about you on social media, and then we are asking them what they think in terms of quantitative surveys. Who you ask depends on who your target audience is and who your stakeholders are. So the entry-level products for reputation are really quantitative surveys dovetailed with media analysis. If you go up into more in-depth methodologies for reputation, you would include in-depth qualitative interviews with stakeholders as well to give you a full picture. Most reputation methodologies will give you a score, will give you some context where you sit next to other businesses and industries. And I think that makes it easier for end clients. Thank you for the question, but I think a lot of that thinking can be taken from you because there are products available ready to go that really have thought about what drives reputation. We have 4 reputation drivers. There's some measurement companies have 3, some have 7. It's really all about similar themes. How do people interact with your leadership, your governance? Do they trust you? Do they love your products and services? There's a set of reputation drivers that most companies will measure for you. And it's just a matter of making sure that that product makes sense and it's targeted towards your key audience and your stakeholders.
So we see in our modern age, there's a lot of either cybersecurity or there is data breach, a data breach. Can you give us without mentioning any client names, Carly, can you give us a practical example of how tools can help you navigate what's happening in a particular crisis?
Absolutely. I will answer your question by taking you on a slight tangent. I strongly believe that teams beat tools every time. Right. So, and I want people to understand that it's the team that you select to partner with that will help you through a crisis every time. So teams beat tools. I worked with, not in terms of cyber incidents, but I worked with a big bank. They had a rogue trading incident. A rogue trader lost $360 million. We provided daily analysis, and in that first month of that issue, it was hourly insights reporting. So we were looking at tonality, volume, velocity, who was speaking. Now that became more involved over time. At the end of the 6-month period, they had lost most board members. They had lost their CEO. A lot of the communications team had also moved on. What we were looking at was not really about the tools and the metrics, but the team that had worked together throughout that process. So I think that if I'm for corporate clients, I would recommend that they obviously have a crisis plan, but they're using that in their RFPs so that you know who your ecosystem is when you get to a crisis. You know who you will count on. They know their role for you in that. So whether they're setting up your keywords so you don't have to think about that, whether you'd need hourly updates, whether it might be half-day alerts. All of that can be planned ahead, and all you need to do is press go and people know their roles. So for me, teams beat tools. It's also a very critical time where you can't be tied up on tools and you can't be tied up in spreadsheets or data or data visualizations. You need people to guide you through that and tell you what matters. So it's about time saving, and it's also about really setting up a partnership and a team to support you. For corporate affairs clients, I would not recommend that they would be on any tools throughout that period, really just getting their team to actually support them through it.
I love that saying, teams beat tools. And I think we've also heard from the other panelists that human insights is actually the difference. But I'd love to hear some practical examples and key learnings that we took away from it. So I'm going to throw the ball to either Philippe or Lerato, who want to take us. Give us what was your key learning, whether it was a public issue or whether it was a corporate reputation issue, a product recall. Give us a practical example without actually sharing the client, and what was your key learning, so that our audience can learn from you. So either Lerato or Philippe, whoever wants to take the question.
Sure, I'll be happy to start to go first, Philippe, if you don't mind. Just to go back to the question you gave to Carly in this instance around, cybersecurity, one of the, in my experience, something I've experienced is that, education in terms of cybersecurity, a very long time ago, I had a client who experienced cybersecurity due to an employee. And it's a very simple thing, unexpected, this thing of chatting with family and friends due to email, from your work email, that became such a big deal. And it caused it was not something that was blown out of proportion, or became publicized, but it was caught in time before it became a major issue externally. But some of the lessons that were learned from there was that it's quite important for internal comms where PR is actually informative and making sure that there's a deliberate education program happening around cybersecurity, around safety, around how employees are actually partisan potentially in a company going down, or a company being affected from a cybersecurity risk, and the implications and how they can actually prevent it. Small things, it's not difficult, it's not expected of them obviously to do the technical work, but it's very important for them to be conscious and aware about certain links not to click, certain emails not to send or respond to, those kind of things, very small but yet quite important. And then, just some of the, from my experience and some of the learnings that we've had, we at Opinion Public had a client where, there was a shareholder dispute, for instance, and this type of shareholder dispute caused such, it was in the region, a major telecoms company, and, the local partner of that international shareholder deliberately, started a campaign against the international partner or the international shareholder, where they were sending out some malicious information. And we quickly had to, step in and say, okay, so look at the situation. How much has already been said? How bad is it? And where exactly is it sort of the fire spreading much quicker than we can, cover? And once we had that information from, our evaluation, be it, the tools that we outsource and the team that we had on the ground, the manual labor, we were then able to establish for ourselves as to what actions are required. And in the meantime, we were able to decide, this is how we're going to counter the activity. They were there are media that are posting very negative things, and we were looking at how the negative versus the positive in terms of the scale. And this was basically a client requirement. That's how they wanted to see. That's what the client wanted to see as a measurement as to what is the positive versus the negative. So we were using that as a guide. And then we were able to see from then on, who are we able to respond to, what the response needs to be, and how we respond to factually as possible. And then from then on, once we've covered our responses to those who are covering the negative coverage, even though the positive coverage was still more than the negative coverage, we were then able to see post that, say about a month later, in terms of the situation, we were able to evaluate then, not necessarily reactively, but this is more proactive. There's media that are still, publishing what is, whether it's online or traditionally, what is, actually factual, we were able to be proactive in the stories and cover and see these are the type of topics that are being covered. These are actually, these are the facts. This is the correct information that we're publishing broadly, even though it's maybe one media that was publishing a story that is inaccurate. So that definitely it's able to help us look, assist, those insights are able to assist us in the actions that we can take moving forward. They inform us, they guide us, and as the business, I would imagine, business decisions from an executive level are able to be taken from that information.
Thanks. Before I quickly hand to Philippe, I've got a quick share. We had a bank in South Africa. It's the third largest bank, and they were attacked by short sellers. So their share price went in tumble. So, if the share price of a beer company falls, people don't stop drinking beer. But when it happens to a bank, we call it a run on the bank. People want to withdraw their deposits. And one of the key learnings we did is we realized that news has a cycle. We all know the news is cycle. It's hard-hitting news that breaks on Twitter. It's all over social media, relevant for South Africa. Then there's the opinion pieces. Then there's the thought leadership. Then they look for another news angle. And what we did was stay ahead of the news angle. So knew which journalists cover what, using great insight tools. And then, of course, staying ahead and getting to third-party endorsers, whether they were academics or consumer champions, to already counter what we know the news media will drive, which was a key learning, which we found very interesting. Philippe, would you like to add anything on that?
Yeah, maybe going back to one of the learnings and also a question in the chat. One of the things that I learned when I'm working for the private sector, which I still do from time to time in between emergencies, is the importance of internal comms, because we often speak about, oh my God, our reactive statement and our first press release and blah, blah, blah. But your very first communication is always, or should always be, internal. And that is, it's often forgotten. So thanks for that question in the chat, which I answered. So that's a big learning. And that, of course, needs to be integrated in your measurement and evaluation system as well. Then more on the overall measurement and evaluation in crisis or emergencies. It at least when I started working in this area where it's about health emergencies and where basically if you don't communicate correctly, people die. It did focus, it made me aware of how important, even more important, measurement, evaluation, and then learning is. Because if you don't measure in an ongoing way, and I mean that's day to day, in our work, be it now with pandemic or the war in Ukraine or the earthquake, it's a day-to-day status report in the morning, and it's a closing one in the evening. That's the way that you measure and evaluate. And so that measurement and evaluation of your communication work in such a situation is crucial, because if you don't measure the effectiveness of your messaging, the information that you give to people so they can save and help themselves, if you don't measure that, you could be distributing those messages for 2 weeks and they would be ineffective. But in that case, that means that people died because they didn't get the right information in their hands. So it does put things in focus. So measurement, evaluation, and then the learning aspect, I think is so crucial. And just to make back a link to the private sector, when I was working for IBM multinational, there it was very, it was very clear. Measurement and evaluation as a public relations manager, which I was at the time, meant that I survived the next cycle of redundancy or not. You made your business case. Why should we pay you? What is your responsibility? Where is the Excel sheet at the time? Unfortunately, an Excel sheet. But where is it? Where is the data that proves that the work that you do is actually, impacting the bottom line? So at the end of the day, in the private sector, it's also a simple business case that you need to do in every single way.
So, Philippe, I'm fascinated about when there's an emergency, whether it's a natural disaster or a health breakout, because you're in the midst of communicating the right messages. How do you take that constant learning or adapt your messages throughout the crisis? Because you can't, as you said, the message that worked last week doesn't work this week. You can't go out and test your audience. You can't do a little focus group. How do you adapt those messages in that time when everyone is like a deer in headlights?
Yeah, so there's two answers to that. So what we do on an ongoing basis, what we call social listening. So that is on and offline listening, thanks to the tools that we're talking about, but also offline, which we've discussed with reaching out to people, focus groups and influencers. And yes, you can do focus groups even in the middle of emergencies, if you have boots on the ground, like we say. So we do that actually in the middle of an emergency. But it's also the learning. We know what works and doesn't work. And of course, everything needs to be adapted to a specific geography, a specific environment, specific audiences, etc. But we know what works in the major defined emergencies. We know what works and what is important and crucial to communicate in an earthquake. We know what works and is important to communicate in the context of a war where you see the different health impacts. We know what happens when two countries go to war. So it's that learning curve as well, because every single time after an emergency, there is a huge learning effort. So we call them after action reviews. It's a real, documented process. What went well, what didn't go well, how can we improve things? What is that continuous improvement thing that you take with you after an emergency as well? Not only at the end of the emergency, but our cycle is to do that on a very regular basis throughout the emergency, because one thing, if you switch over from, let's say, private sector crisis comms professional to emergency risk communication professional, is one thing that you from a psychological and professional point, you need to completely accept, and sometimes it's difficult, that we work 200% in and with uncertainties. While we're certain what is the best practice approach, the things on the ground do change all the time. And so that's that part of uncertainty that you need to integrate and respect and accept in your continuous improvement through measurement and evaluation in the context of an emergency. So it's complex, but once you get over that thing, like, okay, I can communicate without having all the facts. For me personally, that was a big thing, because I came out of private sector, companies on the stock exchange. If you don't have all the facts, you do not communicate, golden rule. And then switching over to, accept that you don't have all the facts because things evolve. Specifically during epidemics and pandemics, accept the fact that you can communicate and still save lives without having all the facts. That was a big switch, but and it has then an impact on measurement and evaluation.
So consistent, clear communications without having the facts. So at least people are in the loop. Carly, back to you.
Not all the facts, not all the
facts, but you have some facts, but you have to keep on communicating. Carly, back to you. You've got the tools, and how often do you, because in the end of a crisis, you certainly submit a report to a client. How do you ensure that the data and the stats and the insight leads to learning and maybe change in behavior or change of operational procedures? Or do you guys hand over the report and say, thanks, we've done our work, we've done the monitoring and evaluation? Or do you sometimes say, hey guys, this is what we think the next step should be?
It's such a good question, because you have a very different relationship with a client in a crisis. The relationship fundamentally changes to a partner, not a provider or a vendor. So it becomes less about tools, and as I said, it becomes about the team and working together with their agencies and with anyone else that needs to be in those discussions. The big difference between everyday measurement and crisis measurement is that it is much more about presenting and talking through those outcomes and workshopping the learnings rather than delivering a PDF report with data in it. So it's certainly, you do need that piece of work to be published and to have recommendations, but it is much more of a conversation and a partnership for the clients that we work with. And you're dealing with people that are exhausted by the end of it. People their own engagement has been tested throughout it, depending on how long it has been. Some things can drag on for 6 to 8 months to a year. That's a long time to be in front of the media. It's a long time to bring a team and a business through that. So I find that, yes, that those pieces of paper, that data is incredibly important. And if you can highlight things like institutional investors are your key audience, if you can keep them on side in this banking scandal, other people will follow because they're setting the agenda. If you can pinpoint those small things as you go in your daily analysis, the analysis at the end has been delivered throughout the time, but you can sit back and reflect. And I think one of the things that always surprises me is that you think that the crisis starts when that first news breaks, and you start measuring from there. When we've gone back and had a look at the year previous, and we've actually done a deep dive into what was the context, what was happening in the lead up to this, it always reveals a truth that was there, that this was coming. Or if there'd been a smaller issue that had not been dealt with properly, it's never that first strike that does serious reputational damage. It's always the second or the third or the fourth. So I think the answers do lie in going back, and it's about listening and making sure that you're looking at those cues before the crisis, and making sure that you don't have anything that is unresolved with your key audiences. I think we do have a lot of clients that receive a monthly report, and that's presented, but in a crisis, it's usually much more frenetic. You're on the phone, you're in WhatsApp groups, you're in discussions every time, you've got stand-ups, sometimes on the hour. It's much more of a partnership and a team rather than delivering a report.
I love it. So my takeout is this constant listening, because then you can see the little flames before there's this huge fireball that's hitting you. And maybe that's where the tools are important, and seeing of those little flames, do they have the potential to become a runaway fire?
Hindsight is 2020, right? So you can, when you look back, you can always see that it was coming, but when you're in the moment, it's not so clear.
Yeah, and also you've got other priorities, businesses and us as the practitioners are focusing on other elements. So exactly. We'd love to open, we've got 10 minutes left. Thank you to Lerato, Kylie and Philippe. We've got about 10 minutes left, so we'd love to open it for more questions. And maybe if we can put see the participants, so we can open the webinar. And you can ask us anything. Ask us about particular country incidences, other key learnings. We'd love to hear from you. If not, I'll keep on asking questions. Let me just see if we've covered the questions in. Joe says, I must please ask you to raise your hand. So if you have a question for us, I only see we've got 26 participants. I don't actually see where you are from. So please raise your hand. We'd love to hear from you. It's very quiet in this room. We chatted about a little bit about AI and about ChatGPT has been the rage this last few weeks. So I just would love to know, Philippe, particularly from you, how can we as practitioners in Africa use those tools? Because I know a lot of our PR agencies don't have access to really intensive tools on the ground. But how can we use that to become better at maybe listening and measuring and learning? Can you give us your 2 cents worth?
Yeah, sure. So it's true that when this specific type of AI, ChatGPT, is just one version of what we call AI. But when this came publicly available, I did look at how to apply that in crisis communication, and it performs very well in the way that you can use a tool like ChatGPT to draft, for instance, crisis scenarios if you want to try and run simulations. It can help you draft reactive statements. It can help you draft that first press release. It can help you draft Q&A to prepare your executives for that first difficult interview. So all these things are possible and the results are amazingly good, but it is a machine. And that means that the quality of output is related to the quality of input. And so it's not just asking because it's a chatbot, asking, oh, write me a press release. No, you have to give the context, you have to give the objective, you have to know how to craft these prompts. And that's really the art of prompt crafting, as we call it now. But if you know how to do that, it is a huge time saver. And that is the only resource we don't have during a crisis or an emergency. It's our most valued resource that we have. So anything that can help us save time is very much welcome. And having done the tests, so ran these tests, I wrote a book about it. I'm not here to promote the book, but in the book, I just also show the exact prompts that I use to get the results that I get. And as someone with, I think, enough experience in crisis and emergencies, I think I can evaluate the responses from that AI, in this case, ChatGPT. Of course, it's a first draft, but the amount of time that you save is so crucial during a crisis that it's definitely a tool to look at. And then I hear some people say, yes, but it's incorrect and it cannot, connect to the web and blah, blah, blah. You don't need that as long as you know what your objective is and you know what the context is, which you should know as a communicator, and know how to craft those requests, then what you will get is amazingly applicable immediately. And so definitely, yeah, look for that. If you don't know about it, get on the train. It's not a hype. I always say, I get people asking me, will AI replace us? No, AI will not replace us, but public relations professionals who know how to use AI will replace you if you don't know AI, definitely.
Love that. And there's a follow-on question from my friend in Ivory Coast, Kwame Sunu, asking, we chatted about predictive analysis tools, and I know we use one in South Africa called NewsWhip, which is a predictive conversation tool, which we find very valuable. But his question is in particular, how advanced is it today, and whether you've tried it, Philippe, and whether you find it effective?
So I've used another tool, but yeah, it's rather amazing now. Of course, again, there's tools, and what do we call predictive analytics? So predictive analytics, where I come from, is really looking at, if you look at it from an online point of view, for instance, it is looking at those conversations which could, at a certain point in time, have an impact on your organization or on topics that you have a certain position on. So it's not only looking at my organization and who's talking about me. It's looking at which kind of conversations are out there. It's a bit of horizon scanning and looking at which conversations are getting clustered, are gaining traction, and who are starting to have minimal impact first on topics where, as an organization, we have a certain interest in or position on or what have you. I think one of the very first, and again, the tools that we're talking about now are very state-of-the-art tools. They do use AI, and the one I'm mentioning that I've tested, those come out of 3-letter agencies and things like that, because they have the technology, but it's a spin-off of, and so that's how it works. But it could be low-key as well. For instance, we know since more than 5 years that we can trace potential outbreaks of influenza just by analyzing tweets. So wow. That's a predictive analytic tool. It's Twitter, and it works. It's scientifically proven that it works. So we can, that's also predictive analytics. So it depends on what you actually need. Again, what kind of tool, what are you going to do with it? What is the objective here? And then pick a tool which works for you, and then will depend on budget as well. Yeah.
Excellent. There was a quick chat asking for the name of your book, Philippe, but I think Tatiana answered it. It's called Mastering Crisis Communications with ChatGPT. So well done. You've got a PR person on this chat promoting your book. I want to say thank you to everyone. We literally have 2 minutes left and they stopped the clock at 3 o'clock on the dot. Thank you to Lerato for an African perspective, to Carly. I think it's almost, what's the time in Australia, for being up and guiding us. And then for Philippe for your valuable insights, and to PRCA for hosting us. And I love this talk and hope we do lots more of that, and with interesting debates and panels around the table. Thank you, and we chat soon.
Thanks for the opportunity. Bye-bye.
Thank you.